What would you do if someone told you a woman was already gone, but she could still hear everything happening around her? I didn't get involved because of a family problem. I got involved because the money didn't make sense. Millions were moving from an account that wasn't supposed to be active anymore. On paper, she was in a vegetative state. No awareness, no voice, no control. But the numbers told a different story, and when I looked closer, I realized something was very wrong. Because the people taking care of her weren't trying to save her. They were making sure she never woke up. The evening air was cool and still, settling quietly over the suburban street as porch lights flickered on one by one, and the last warmth of the day faded into a silence that felt ordinary, almost too ordinary. Evelyn Parker stepped out of the taxi slowly, one hand gripping her small leather bag, the other pressing gently against her lower back. At 65, she carried herself with quiet dignity, silver hair pulled into a neat low bun, her posture slightly bent but steady. Years of life had softened her features, but not her warmth. She was the kind of woman who believed in people first, especially family. That belief had shaped her entire life, and it was the reason she was here now, without hesitation, without questions. The house in front of her belonged to her son. Daniel Parker opened the door before she even knocked, as if he had been watching for her arrival. He stood tall and composed, his frame straight, his presence controlled in a way that felt almost deliberate. At 38, Daniel had grown into a man defined by structure, sharp jawline, clean-shaven, dark hair always in place. Even at home, his shirt was pressed, his sleeves rolled just enough to suggest effort without revealing discomfort. After his father died, Daniel had learned early that control was safety. Over time, that belief had hardened into something more rigid, something that rarely left room for uncertainty. "Mom," he said, offering a small smile as he stepped aside. Evelyn returned it gently, studying his face for a moment longer than usual. "You look tired," she said. "Just work," Daniel replied, too quickly, already guiding her inside. The house was quiet, quieter than she expected. Not unsettling, just still. Evelyn brushed the thought aside almost immediately. This was a house caring for someone who could no longer respond. Of course it would be quiet. Sophie appeared from the hallway, wiping her hands on a folded cloth. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her pale skin almost translucent under the warm light. Her long brown hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling forward in a way that suggested distraction more than style. Her features were soft, almost fragile, but her eyes carried something heavier, fatigue, yes, but also something she seemed to be holding down, carefully, constantly. "Hi, Evelyn," Sophie said, stepping closer with a polite smile. Evelyn embraced her lightly, immediately noticing the tension in her shoulders. Sophie didn't lean into the hug, she endured it. "How is she?" Evelyn asked quietly. Sophie hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before answering. "The same. No change." Daniel stepped in smoothly, his voice even. "From what we understand, there's no response anymore." Evelyn nodded. That was what she had been told. That was what she chose to accept. Margaret Hayes lay in the bedroom at the end of the hallway. She was 62, a woman who had once carried herself with quiet strength, the kind built from years of discipline and independence. Even now, traces of that strength remained in her still features, defined cheekbones, a firm jaw softened only slightly by time, dark hair streaked with silver resting against the pillow. She didn't look gone, she looked paused. Machines hummed beside her, tubes, lines, monitors. Everything was arranged in a way that made sense. Nothing appeared out of place. Sophie explained the routine, medication times, feeding schedule, what to expect. Her voice was steady, controlled, but every time Evelyn glanced toward Margaret, Sophie's gaze shifted away, lingering anywhere else but there. Evelyn noticed, but she said nothing. That night, after dinner, the house settled deeper into silence. Evelyn walked into Margaret's room alone, carrying a folded blanket. Her movements were slow, careful, instinctive. She adjusted the blanket gently across Margaret's chest, smoothing it down the way she used to do when Daniel was a boy. "You're not alone," she murmured softly. And then, movement. Margaret's fingers twitched. Evelyn froze, her breath catching. Before she could react, Margaret's eyes opened. Only for a few seconds, but they weren't empty. They were aware. Margaret's hand closed around Evelyn's wrist, weak, trembling, but unmistakably intentional. Her lips moved, struggling against something invisible, something holding her back. "Don't. Trust." The words barely formed. And then, gone. Her grip loosened, her eyes closed, her body returned to stillness as if nothing had happened. Evelyn's heart slammed against her chest. This wasn't possible. It didn't make sense. "Daniel!" she called, her voice sharp with panic. "Sophie, come here!" Footsteps rushed in. Sophie entered first, Daniel close behind. "What happened?" Daniel asked. "She woke up," Evelyn said, her voice unsteady. "She looked at me. She held my hand. She tried to speak." Sophie stopped, just for a moment. Then she moved quickly to the bedside, checking the monitor, adjusting the line. "It's a reflex," she said, trying to sound calm. "That can happen sometimes." "But It's not awareness," Sophie said, a little too quickly. Her hand hovered over the IV, and Evelyn saw it, a slight tremor. Sophie adjusted the blanket, then stopped halfway, her fingers tightening slightly before she forced herself to finish the motion. Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Mom, this is normal in cases like this. You're just not used to it." Evelyn looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Slowly, she nodded. "Try to get some rest," Daniel added gently. Time passed, not long, just enough for the house to settle again. Evelyn stepped into the hallway, her thoughts still tangled, her chest tight with something she couldn't fully understand. It had to be nothing. It had to be. As she passed the study, voices drifted through the slightly open door. Daniel's voice, low, controlled. "Increase the dose tomorrow." A pause. Then, "I don't want her waking up again." Evelyn stopped, completely still. The silence that followed pressed in around her, and in that moment, something inside her didn't break, but it was no longer whole. Morning arrived quietly, filtered through pale curtains that softened the light into something almost gentle, as if the house itself were trying to maintain the illusion that everything inside it was normal. Evelyn Parker woke earlier than she intended, her sleep shallow and fragmented, her mind replaying the moment from the night before in fragments she couldn't quite piece together. For a few seconds after opening her eyes, she almost convinced herself it had been a dream, but the lingering tension in her chest told her otherwise. She sat up slowly, pressing her palm against her sternum, grounding herself before stepping out into the hallway, where the same unnatural quiet greeted her again. In the kitchen, Sophie was already awake, standing by the counter with a mug of coffee held between both hands. Up close in the morning light, the exhaustion in her face was more visible, her skin pale, her lips slightly dry, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. She looked like someone who hadn't rested in days, not because she couldn't, but because something inside her refused to let her. When she noticed Evelyn, she gave a small nod instead of a greeting, as if even simple conversation required more energy than she could spare. "You're up early," Evelyn said gently, watching her. Sophie shrugged faintly. "Couldn't sleep." There was a pause, thin but heavy, before Evelyn asked, "Does she ever move like that?" Sophie didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug before she spoke. "Sometimes the body reacts. It doesn't mean anything." The answer sounded practiced, not rehearsed exactly, but familiar, as though she had said it enough times to believe it herself. Daniel entered a moment later, already dressed, already composed, his presence shifting the atmosphere subtly but unmistakably. He nodded at Evelyn, then reached for a glass of water without asking either of them anything. His routine seemed untouched by the tension that lingered in the room, as if whatever had happened the night before existed only in Evelyn's perception. "I've scheduled a nurse to stop by later," he said casually, "just to check vitals." Evelyn nodded, though something about the phrasing stayed with her. Scheduled, controlled, managed. The morning passed in slow, careful observation. Evelyn found herself drawn repeatedly back to Margaret's room, each time telling herself she was only checking, only helping, only doing what she came here to do. But each visit carried a quiet expectation she didn't fully admit to herself. The machines hummed the same way, the lines remained steady, Margaret's body unchanged, still, silent, compliant. Until it wasn't. The first time it happened that day, it lasted no more than 3 seconds. Margaret's eyelids flickered. Evelyn leaned forward immediately, her breath catching, her fingers hovering just above the blanket as if afraid to touch it. Margaret's eyes opened, not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to see movement, enough to search. Her gaze drifted, unfocused at first, then settled, directly on Evelyn. There was no confusion in it, only fear. Evelyn felt it like a physical force. "Margaret?" she whispered, leaning closer. Margaret's lips moved again, struggling, the sound barely forming. "Here." The word was incomplete, but it was unmistakable. And then, the door opened. Sophie stepped in. Her movement was immediate, almost instinctive. She crossed the room quickly, her face tightening as her eyes flicked from Margaret to Evelyn. "It's okay," she said quickly, already reaching for the IV line. "This happens sometimes." Evelyn didn't step back. She watched. Sophie adjusted the line with careful precision, her hands moving faster than before, but not smoother. There was tension in her fingers, a faint stiffness in the way she handled the equipment. Margaret's eyes closed again within seconds. The moment ended as abruptly as it began. Sophie exhaled quietly, stepping away from the bed almost as soon as it was done. She didn't look at Margaret again. She didn't look at Evelyn either. "I'll check again later," she said, already turning toward the door. And then she left. Evelyn remained where she was. The room felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because something had been revealed, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The second time happened just after noon. Shorter, sharper. Margaret's hand twitched again, her fingers curling slightly against the sheet as her eyes opened in a quick, desperate motion. Evelyn was closer this time, waiting. "Hear everything." The words were broken, but clearer than before. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't call out this time. She didn't move, because something else had changed. Footsteps, again, always right on time. Sophie appeared at the doorway, but this time she didn't move immediately. She stopped, just inside the frame. Her eyes met Margaret's, and for a brief, unguarded second, something broke through. Not fear, not shock, guilt. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable. It passed quickly, too quickly. Sophie stepped forward, her movements resuming their practiced rhythm, her expression smoothing into something controlled, manageable. But Evelyn had seen it, and that was enough. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Each time Margaret stirred, Sophie appeared. Each time Sophie intervened, the moment ended. Daniel remained consistent, steady, composed, always ready with an explanation that made just enough sense to hold together. Too much sense. That realization unsettled Evelyn more than anything else, because real situations weren't this clean. Real illness wasn't this predictable. Real life didn't follow patterns this precise. By late afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing alone in the hallway, staring at the closed door of Margaret's room. She wasn't thinking about what she had seen anymore. She was thinking about what it meant, and more importantly, what she was supposed to do with it. Because now there were only two possibilities. Either she was misunderstanding everything, or she wasn't. And if she wasn't, then someone inside this house already knew the truth and was making sure no one else ever would. Night settled more heavily than before, pressing against the windows as if the darkness itself had weight, the house sinking deeper into a silence that no longer felt natural but carefully maintained. Evelyn Parker did not return to her room. Instead, she remained seated beside Margaret's bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her posture rigid with a quiet determination that had replaced the confusion of the previous day. The soft hum of the machines filled the space between breaths, steady and indifferent, as if they alone believed everything was under control. But Evelyn no longer trusted what she saw on the surface. Not after what she had heard. Not after what she had witnessed. Margaret Hayes lay motionless beneath the dim light, her face calm in a way that no longer reassured Evelyn. There was something unsettling about the stillness now, something that felt less like rest and more like restraint. Her breathing remained shallow but consistent, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed disconnected from everything else happening around her. Evelyn leaned slightly forward, her voice low, almost hesitant. "If you can hear me, try again." The words lingered in the air. Nothing happened. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Evelyn almost convinced herself she had imagined everything, again, when suddenly a faint movement broke the stillness. Margaret's fingers shifted. Just slightly. Evelyn's breath caught as she moved closer, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Margaret's eyelids trembled, then slowly opened. This time, it lasted longer. Not much, 5 seconds maybe, but longer than before. Enough for intention. Her eyes moved with effort, as if dragging themselves through something thick and invisible until they found Evelyn. Locked onto her. Desperate. "Here," Margaret whispered, the words strained, pulled from somewhere deep inside her body. Evelyn felt a sharp, cold wave run through her chest. "You can hear me?" she asked, her voice trembling now, the disbelief giving way to something far more real. Margaret's lips moved again, struggling against the same unseen force. "Everything." The word came out fractured, incomplete, but unmistakable. Evelyn's hand instinctively reached for hers, careful, afraid that even the slightest pressure might break whatever fragile connection had formed. Margaret's fingers twitched in response, weak but alive. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, though she forced herself to stay composed. This wasn't the moment to fall apart. This was the moment to understand. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "What's happening to you?" Margaret's breathing shifted, shallow and uneven now, as if even the act of speaking was pulling her back toward silence. "Money," she struggled. "Papers. Drug." Each word came slower than the last, her voice fading between them, as if something inside her was actively resisting the effort. Evelyn's mind raced, trying to assemble meaning from fragments that refused to stay still. "Who?" she asked, leaning closer. "Who is doing this?" Margaret's eyes flickered, her focus slipping for a moment before returning. "Sophie." The name broke unevenly from her lips. Evelyn froze. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly again, a faint surge of urgency pushing through her weakness. "Doesn't want." The effort cost her. Evelyn could see it. The strain pulling at every muscle in her face, the way her body seemed to fight itself just to form the thought. "Can't. Stop." The words barely held together, but they were enough. Evelyn's heart sank. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. Margaret's eyes widened, not in confusion, in fear. The door opened. Sophie stood there. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply stood in the doorway, her figure framed by the dim hallway light, her expression unreadable until it wasn't. Her eyes dropped to Margaret, and something shifted. Sophie stepped forward slowly, almost cautiously, as if approaching something fragile or dangerous. She didn't speak, didn't touch anything. She just stood beside the bed, looking. Her face softened, but not with relief, with something closer to grief. Her hand hovered slightly above the blanket, fingers curling inward, as if she wanted to reach out but couldn't allow herself to. Evelyn watched her carefully. This wasn't the same Sophie from earlier. This was someone stripped of control. Margaret's gaze locked onto her daughter, and for the first time, there was something beyond fear in her eyes. There was recognition and pain. Sophie swallowed hard, her throat tightening visibly as she looked down at the woman in the bed. She started, but the word never finished. Her lips pressed together, her breathing uneven. For a moment, it looked like she might say something, anything. Instead, she stepped back. The wall went back up. Her expression shifted, controlled, distant, composed. Just in time, because Daniel appeared behind her. He stepped into the room with the same calm presence, his eyes scanning the scene quickly, assessing, measuring. "What's going on?" he asked. Sophie didn't hesitate this time. She had a reflex again, she said, her voice steady now, as if the moment before had never happened. Daniel nodded once, his gaze shifting briefly toward Evelyn, searching her face for something. Reaction, doubt, resistance. Evelyn said nothing. She couldn't. Because now she understood something far more dangerous than suspicion. Sophie wasn't just involved, she was trapped. Daniel moved closer to the bed, checking the monitor with practiced ease, his hands steady, precise. Everything about him remained controlled, unshaken. Margaret's eyes had already closed again. Her body returned to stillness. The moment was over. But it wasn't gone. It lingered, in Evelyn's chest, in Sophie's silence, in the space between words that were never spoken. Daniel straightened, his attention returning to Evelyn. "You should get some rest," he said calmly. "You've been sitting here all night." Evelyn nodded slowly. She stood, her movements careful, measured, but her mind was no longer searching for explanations. It was holding on to truth, even if that truth wasn't complete yet, even if it was dangerous. As she stepped out of the room, she glanced back once more, at Margaret, at Sophie, at Daniel. 3 people, 1 silence, and only one of them still had a choice. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not louder, but heavier, as if something invisible had settled into the walls overnight and refused to leave. Evelyn Parker moved carefully through the hallway, her steps softer than usual, her senses sharpened by everything she now knew but could not yet prove. She no longer entered rooms without purpose. She no longer accepted explanations without question. The house had not changed, but she had. Daniel had already left early, or at least that was what Sophie said. He had to step out for a meeting, she explained, her voice low, her posture slightly slouched as she stood near the kitchen counter, stirring a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Up close, Sophie looked worse than the day before. The faint shadows under her eyes had deepened, her lips pressed together more tightly, her movements slower, as if each action required effort she barely had left. "I'll check on her," Evelyn said quietly. Sophie nodded but didn't follow. That alone was new. Margaret's room was unchanged, but Evelyn no longer saw it the same way. The arrangement of medication bottles on the small side table caught her attention this time. Labels she hadn't read before, names she didn't recognize, dosages she couldn't interpret, but didn't need to. Something about the quantity alone felt excessive. She stepped closer, careful, her fingers brushing lightly over the bottles without moving them out of place. Then she noticed something else, a folder, half hidden beneath a stack of folded linens. Evelyn hesitated, then she reached for it. Inside were documents, printed statements, account summaries, transaction records, numbers scattered across the pages, some circled, some highlighted. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Loss. Large, repeated, undeniable loss. Sophie's name appeared on several of the documents. Investment accounts, liquidations, margin calls. Evelyn's breath slowed as the pieces began to shift in her mind. This wasn't sudden. This had been building. There was a smaller envelope tucked behind the papers. She opened it carefully. A check copy, signed by Margaret. The date was recent. Too recent. Evelyn stared at the signature. It looked right, but it didn't feel right. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned quickly. Sophie stood in the doorway, still, watching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sophie stepped forward slowly, her gaze dropping briefly to the papers in Evelyn's hand before lifting again. "You shouldn't go through those," she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, only fatigue. Evelyn held the folder gently, not defensive, not accusing. "I wasn't looking for anything," she said. "I just found it." Sophie exhaled, a small, tired sound. "It doesn't matter anymore," she murmured. That was the first honest thing she had said. Evelyn studied her carefully. "What happened?" Sophie hesitated. Then, unexpectedly, she sat down. Not gracefully, just heavily, as if her body had given up holding itself together. "It started with one investment," she said, her voice distant, almost detached. "Something small, something safe." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. It wasn't. She let out a breath that trembled. "I thought I could fix it. Every time it went wrong, I told myself I just needed one more chance to make it right." Her eyes flickered upward briefly, meeting Evelyn's. But it never worked. Evelyn didn't interrupt, didn't rush. Sophie continued, quieter now. "Daniel tried to help. At first. There was something in the way she said it. At first. He said we could recover, that we just needed time, that we couldn't let anyone know." Evelyn's grip on the folder tightened slightly. "And Margaret?" she asked softly. Sophie swallowed. "She found out." The words came out harder this time. She didn't mean to. She saw something. A transfer, I think. She asked questions. Sophie looked down again, her voice dropping. "We told her everything." There was a pause. "She helped us." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "How much?" Sophie shook her head faintly. "Not enough." Silence settled between them. Then Sophie added, barely audible, "It was never going to be enough." Evelyn understood, because she had seen the numbers, the scale of it. "So what happened next?" she asked. Sophie's shoulders tensed. "Daniel said we couldn't stop," she said slowly. "He said if we stopped, everything would collapse, that we'd lose everything, that we'd go to prison." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "He started moving money, making deals, things I didn't understand." Evelyn watched her closely. "And did they work?" Sophie let out a hollow laugh. "No." The answer was immediate, final. Evelyn glanced back at the documents. "So Margaret refused to help again?" Sophie nodded. "She said it wasn't right, that something was wrong with the accounts, that she wouldn't sign anything else." The room felt colder. Evelyn spoke carefully. "And that's when this started." Sophie didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the house. Both women froze. Daniel. Sophie stood up immediately, the shift in her body instant, controlled, automatic. The moment from seconds ago vanished. Her expression reset. Her posture straightened. Evelyn saw it happen, that change, that switch. Daniel entered the room, his gaze moving between them, then briefly to the folder in Evelyn's hand. "Everything all right?" he asked. His tone was calm, measured, too calm. Evelyn closed the folder slowly and set it back where she found it. "Yes," she said. Daniel held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded. "Good." He stepped closer to the bed, checking the monitor, adjusting the settings with practiced familiarity. As if none of this was new. As if all of this had been planned. Evelyn watched him in silence. The pieces had fallen into place. Not completely, but enough. This wasn't just desperation anymore. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something built step by step, decision by decision, until there was no clean way out. And now, they weren't trying to fix it. They were trying to finish it. Rain tapped softly against the glass of the high-rise office, streaking the city lights into blurred lines of gold and white, as if the world outside had been smudged into something easier to ignore than understand. Alex Carter didn't ignore patterns. He sat alone at his desk, the glow of multiple monitors reflecting across his face, sharp and composed, his posture relaxed but deliberate, like someone who conserved energy for moments that mattered. At 38, Alex carried a presence that was difficult to define at first glance. Tall, lean, with a quiet confidence that came not from arrogance, but from certainty. His dark hair was slightly unkempt in a way that suggested distraction rather than neglect, and a faint shadow of stubble framed his jaw, softening features that might otherwise seem too precise, too calculated. His eyes, however, were where the truth lived, steady, observant, and unsettlingly patient, as if they had learned long ago that answers came not from urgency, but from waiting long enough to see what others tried to hide. He worked as a financial investigator, though the title barely captured what he actually did. Years ago, he had built his reputation by uncovering a corporate fraud case that had nearly collapsed an entire investment firm, exposing a network of falsified accounts and hidden liabilities that others had overlooked. Since then, he had developed a habit, an instinct really, for noticing irregularities buried beneath otherwise convincing systems. And once something caught his attention, he didn't let it go. Daniel Parker had not been his target, not at first. The case had started with a routine anomaly, small discrepancies across several mid-tier investment accounts, the kind most auditors would dismiss as timing errors or reporting delays. But Alex didn't dismiss them, he traced them. Transaction by transaction, account by account, until the pattern stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like intent. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly, not always directly, but often enough to matter. Secondary authorizations, indirect transfers, layered movements designed to obscure origin rather than clarify it. Alex leaned back slightly in his chair, one hand resting against his chin as he studied the data on the screen. Too careful, he murmured to himself. Not sloppy enough to be accidental, not clean enough to be legitimate. That was where the truth usually lived. A notification appeared on one of the monitors, an automated flag triggered by a cross-account linkage. Alex clicked it open. And that's when he saw her name, Margaret Hayes. He paused, scrolled, then leaned forward again, slower this time. A significant amount of money had been transferred out of Margaret's account over a period of weeks. Not all at once, never all at once, but in structured increments, carefully timed, each transaction small enough to avoid immediate scrutiny, but collectively large enough to matter. Very large. Alex's eyes narrowed slightly. He pulled up the account profile. Age, 62. Status, inactive. Medical flag, non-responsive. He stared at the screen for a moment longer than usual. Then he opened another window. Cross-referencing, medical documentation, authorization records. The files were there, but something about them felt incomplete. Too internal, too self-contained. No hospital verification, no external confirmation. Just documentation that referenced itself. Alex exhaled slowly. "That's not right," he said under his breath. He shifted his focus back to the transactions. Timing, sequence, authorization signatures. The signatures matched. But the timing didn't. The transfers had begun shortly after the recorded date of Margaret's collapse, and they hadn't stopped. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard now, pulling in additional layers of data, reconstructing a timeline from fragments that hadn't been meant to connect. Daniel's accounts, Sophie's investments, Margaret's assets, 3 separate structures, 1 shared pattern, loss, desperation, then control. Alex leaned back again, this time slower. He didn't rush conclusions, he tested them. If Margaret had truly been non-responsive, she shouldn't have been signing anything. If the documents were legitimate, there should be external confirmation. If the transfers were legal, they wouldn't need to be hidden. He looked at the screen again. Then he made a decision. He picked up his phone, dialed a number. "Clara, I need you to check something for me," he said when the line connected. Clara Nguyen worked as a data analyst, early 30s, precise, methodical, with a sharp attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. She had built her career verifying financial inconsistencies that others overlooked, and if Alex trusted anyone to validate what he was seeing, it was her. "What am I looking for?" she asked. "Medical verification," Alex said. "Margaret Hayes. I need to know if there's any hospital record tied to her current condition. There was a pause. "Give me an hour," Clara replied. Alex ended the call and returned to the screens, but his focus had shifted. This wasn't just financial anymore. This was structural, designed. And if he was right, someone wasn't just moving money. They were controlling access to the person it belonged to. Across the city, Evelyn Parker sat alone in the dim hallway, her phone resting in her hand, her thoughts circling the same realization she couldn't escape. She wasn't safe here. Not completely. Not anymore. She hadn't told Daniel what she knew. She hadn't told Sophie what she understood. But the weight of it was beginning to show. In the way she moved, in the way she watched, in the way silence now felt like something she had to manage instead of trust. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice. Calm, measured. "Mrs. Parker?" Evelyn straightened slightly. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Alex Carter," the voice said, "and I believe you're in a situation you don't fully understand yet." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. "What are you talking about?" Another pause. "I've been following a financial trail connected to your son," Alex said. "It led me to Margaret Hayes." Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I need you to listen carefully," Alex continued. "Do not confront anyone. Do not change your behavior. And whatever you do, do not let them know you suspect anything." Evelyn's heart began to pound again. "They're watching more than you think." Silence filled the line. Then Evelyn asked quietly, "Is she aware?" Alex didn't answer immediately, but when he did, yes. That single word settled into Evelyn's chest like something final, something undeniable. "Then you already know what that means," he added. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. She did. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because this didn't start as a family issue," Alex said. "It started as fraud." A pause. "And it doesn't end there." The line went quiet. Then, "I'll contact you again," he said. "Be careful." The call ended. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly. The house was still silent, but now, she knew it wasn't empty. And somewhere else, someone else was already looking inside it. The air inside the house felt tighter now, as if every movement, every sound, every breath had begun to carry weight. The kind that only comes when the truth is no longer distant, but dangerously close to being exposed. Evelyn Parker moved differently, not slower, but more precise. Every step she took was measured, every glance calculated, every word filtered through a growing awareness that she was no longer just observing events, she was part of them. The call from Alex Carter hadn't just given her answers, it had given her direction, and direction came with risk. She stood in Margaret's room again, the faint scent of antiseptic lingering in the air, her eyes scanning the space not as a caretaker, but as someone searching for inconsistencies. The medications were the first place she returned to. This time, she didn't just look, she memorized. Bottle labels, dosage numbers, manufacturer names. Later, in the quiet of the hallway, she pulled out her phone and discreetly searched them one by one. What she found made her stomach tighten. 2 of the medications didn't match standard prescriptions for stroke recovery. One was a heavy sedative, the kind used to suppress responsiveness. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly, her fingers tightening around it. That wasn't treatment. That was control. Behind her, the floor shifted slightly. Daniel. He appeared at the end of the hallway, his presence as composed as ever, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. "You've been spending a lot of time in there," he said casually. Evelyn turned, offering a small, calm smile. She shouldn't be alone. Daniel studied her for a moment, not suspicious, not yet, but observant. "That's kind of you," he said. Then, after a pause, "Just remember what the doctor said." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Which part?" "That there's no awareness," Daniel replied evenly. "No response, nothing coming back." His tone was gentle, but firm, as if he wasn't reminding her, he was guiding her. Evelyn held his gaze, just long enough, then nodded. "Of course." Daniel smiled faintly, satisfied. or pretending to be. That night, Evelyn didn't wait for Margaret to wake. She prepared for it. She dimmed the lights slightly, adjusted her position closer to the bed, and kept her hand resting lightly over Margaret's, as if anchoring her to the moment. It didn't take long. Margaret's fingers twitched. Then her eyes opened, faster this time, more urgently. "They... watching," she whispered, the words broken, strained. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I know. I'm listening." Margaret's breathing quickened slightly. "Paper. Wrong." Evelyn nodded, encouraging gently. "I saw them." Margaret's grip tightened weakly. "Stop him." The effort was draining her quickly. Evelyn could see it, the way her body began to resist again, pulling her back toward silence. "I will," Evelyn whispered. The door creaked. Margaret's eyes widened again. Fear, immediate, instinctive. Sophie stood there, but this time she didn't step in right away. She looked at Evelyn, really looked, and something passed between them, understanding. Sophie closed the door behind her quietly. That alone was new. She walked toward the bed slowly, her shoulders tense, her hands empty. No syringe, no immediate movement toward the IV. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice low, trembling despite her effort to control it. Evelyn didn't speak. She let Sophie continue. "I thought I could fix it," Sophie said, her eyes locked on Margaret, but unfocused, as if she was looking through her instead of at her. "I thought if I just followed along long enough, it would end." Her lips pressed together tightly. "But it didn't," her voice cracked. "And now I don't know how to stop." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "Then don't." Sophie shook her head immediately, panic flashing across her face. "You don't understand." "Help me understand," Evelyn said. Sophie hesitated. Then, "He's already moved too much money," she whispered. "If this collapses, it's not just fraud, it's prison." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Then let it collapse," she said quietly. Sophie looked at her like she had just said something impossible. "You think he'll let that happen?" Sophie asked. Before Evelyn could answer, the door opened. Daniel. The shift was instant. Sophie stepped back. Her posture straightened, her expression hardened. Evelyn saw it again, that transformation, faster this time, cleaner. Daniel walked in slowly, his eyes moving between them, reading the room with quiet efficiency. "Everything all right?" he asked. Sophie nodded first, too quickly. "Yes." Daniel's gaze lingered on her for half a second longer, then moved to Evelyn. "She was just checking on her," Sophie added. Evelyn said nothing. Daniel stepped closer to the bed, his attention moving to the IV line. "Good," he said. "Consistency matters." He adjusted the drip slightly, just slightly, but Evelyn saw it, not the action, the intention. Then he turned to Evelyn again. "You've been very helpful," he said. "Actually, there's something I'd like you to do." Evelyn felt her chest tighten, but her expression remained calm. "What is it?" Daniel smiled, warm, measured. "I need you to confirm something later," he said. "For documentation." A pause. "That she hasn't shown any signs of awareness." Silence, heavy, controlled. Evelyn understood. This wasn't a request, it was a test. Or worse, a step in the plan. "I'll think about it," she said carefully. Daniel's smile didn't fade, but something behind it did. "Of course," he replied. Later that night, Evelyn sat alone again, her phone in her hand, her thoughts sharper than ever. She dialed. Alex answered immediately. "I think he knows," she said quietly. There was a brief pause. "He doesn't know what?" Alex replied calmly. "He's testing variables." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "He wants me to confirm she's never been conscious." Another pause. Then, "That's your final piece," Alex said. Evelyn frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "It proves intent," Alex said. "Not just fraud, control, manipulation, coercion. Evelyn looked toward Margaret's room. So what happens now? Alex didn't hesitate. Now, he said, his voice steady, we let him commit to it. Silence filled the space between them, and for the first time, Evelyn realized this wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about catching it in the act. The night didn't arrive quietly this time. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Evelyn Parker stood in the hallway longer than usual before entering Margaret's room, her hand resting lightly against the wall as she steadied herself. Everything Alex had said echoed in her mind, not as instructions anymore, but as inevitabilities. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment Daniel would cross the line completely, not just in action, but in intent. Inside the room, the lights were dimmer than before. Too dim. Margaret lay still beneath the thin blanket, her face pale but no longer lifeless in Evelyn's eyes. Now, Evelyn saw the tension beneath the stillness, the quiet resistance, the fight that hadn't disappeared, only been suppressed. Sophie stood near the IV stand. Already. She hadn't waited this time. Her posture was rigid, her shoulders slightly hunched forward, as if her body was bracing against something her mind hadn't fully accepted. In her hand was a syringe, clear, precise, filled with a liquid that caught the low light just enough to make it visible. Her fingers trembled. Not violently, but enough. Enough to betray her. Daniel stood behind her, watching, not intervening, not comforting, just observing. At 38, Daniel's presence felt sharper than ever, every line of his face drawn tighter, more defined, as if the restraint he had carried for so long had finally been replaced by something colder. His eyes no longer pretended calm. They calculated, measured, final. "We're done waiting," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was no softness left in it. Sophie didn't move. Her grip tightened slightly around the syringe. She started, but her voice failed before the words could form. Daniel stepped closer. "Everything is already in place," he continued. "The documents are ready. The accounts are clean. There's nothing left to fix." He paused, then added, "This is the last step." Sophie shook her head faintly, her breath uneven. "She's my mother," she whispered. The words hung in the air, fragile, almost meaningless now. Daniel's expression didn't change. "She stopped being your responsibility the moment she refused to help us," he said. The cruelty in the statement wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise. Sophie's hand lowered slightly, then lifted again, caught between action and collapse. Evelyn stood just outside the doorway, unseen, her phone held low, angled just enough, recording. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain they would hear it, but neither of them looked toward her. They were too focused on the moment, on the decision, on the end. "Do it," Daniel said. Simple, final. Sophie stepped closer to the bed. Her eyes moved to Margaret's face, and for a brief second, everything slowed. Margaret's eyelids trembled, then opened. Not weakly, not briefly, fully. Her gaze locked onto Sophie, clear, present, alive. Sophie froze. The syringe hovered in the air, suspended between intent and hesitation. "Mom?" she whispered. Margaret's lips parted, and this time, the words came, not broken, not fragmented. "Stop." The room held its breath. Sophie's hand shook harder now, her composure collapsing in real time as the reality she had been avoiding finally stood in front of her, undeniable. "She's awake," she said, her voice breaking. "She's awake, Daniel." Daniel didn't move, didn't react. For a moment, it almost seemed like he hadn't heard. Then his eyes shifted, not to Margaret, to Sophie. "She's not," he said calmly. The denial was immediate, absolute. Sophie stared at him, disbelief flooding her expression. "I can see her," she started. "You're seeing what you want to see," Daniel interrupted. His tone sharpened slightly. "Finish it." Sophie stepped back. "I can't." The words came out stronger this time, real. Daniel took a step forward. "And if you don't," he said quietly, "everything we've done becomes meaningless." Evelyn's grip tightened around the phone. This was it. The line. The proof. Margaret's hand moved again, stronger than before. Her fingers curled weakly toward Sophie. "Sophie," she said, her voice trembling but unmistakably clear. "Don't let him." The door burst open. The sound shattered the moment. Multiple footsteps, fast, decisive. Police officers flooded into the room, their presence immediate and overwhelming, commands cutting through the silence before anyone could react. "Step away from the bed!" Daniel turned sharply, his expression shifting for the first time, not into panic, but into something colder. Calculation. Too late. Two officers moved toward him, restraining his arms before he could respond. "This is a mistake," Daniel said, his voice steady even now. "You don't understand what you're walking into." But his words held no power anymore. Sophie dropped the syringe. It hit the floor with a soft, hollow sound. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed beside the bed, her hands covering her face as the weight of everything finally broke through. "I didn't want this," she sobbed. "I didn't want this." Evelyn stepped forward slowly, lowering the phone. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice wasn't. "It's over," she said quietly. Margaret's eyes remained open, watching, breathing, alive. And for the first time, not alone. The storm had passed, but the air it left behind felt different, cleaner, sharper, as if something buried too long had finally been dragged into the light, leaving no room for silence to hide what had happened. The house was no longer quiet. It was empty, not abandoned, but cleared. The sterile calm that once filled every corner had been replaced by something more honest, something imperfect but real. The machines were gone, the bottles removed, the carefully arranged illusion dismantled piece by piece. What remained was simply a house again, not a stage. Margaret Hayes had been moved to a private medical facility across the city, one that didn't rely on internal paperwork or controlled narratives. The room she now occupied was brighter, filled with natural light that filtered through wide windows, softening the edges of everything it touched. Her condition was still fragile, but no longer misunderstood. Dr. Rebecca Lawson stood at the foot of Margaret's bed, reviewing a digital chart with quiet focus. She was in her mid-40s, tall and composed, with sharp features softened by a calm, grounded demeanor. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a low, practical knot, and her voice carried the steady clarity of someone who had spent years delivering difficult truths without losing empathy. Unlike the vague, self-contained documentation Evelyn had seen before, Rebecca's approach was precise, transparent, and externally verified. Every diagnosis supported, every observation recorded. She was never fully unresponsive, Rebecca said, glancing up at Evelyn. Her awareness was suppressed, not absent. Evelyn stood beside the bed, her hands clasped tightly, her posture still carrying the weight of everything that had happened, but no longer the uncertainty. "The sedatives?" she asked. Rebecca nodded. "Administered in controlled doses, likely to limit motor response and speech. Enough to make her appear non-reactive to an untrained observer." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "She heard everything," she whispered. Rebecca didn't soften the truth. "Most likely, yes." Margaret's eyes were open now, not always steady, not always strong, but present. She turned her head slightly toward Evelyn, her expression still fragile, but no longer trapped. "You stayed," Margaret said, her voice quiet but clear. Evelyn's composure broke for the first time, not into panic, not into fear, but into something gentler. "I almost didn't understand in time," she admitted. Margaret's lips curved faintly. "You did." Across the city, Daniel Parker sat in an interrogation room, the sharp fluorescent light above him casting hard shadows across a face that no longer held the same controlled confidence. His posture was still straight, but there was tension in it now, a subtle rigidity that betrayed the pressure building beneath the surface. Detective Marcus Hale sat across from him, his presence calm but unyielding. Hale was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, his graying hair cut short, his expression defined by years of watching people try, and fail, to talk their way out of consequences. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't need to be. His strength came from patience, from letting silence do the work. You had access, Hale said evenly. You had motive, and now we have intent. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He stared at the table, his jaw tightening slightly. You're building a narrative, he said finally. Hale didn't react. I'm building a case, he replied. There was a difference, and both of them knew it. The charges were already forming: financial fraud, coercion, attempted harm, falsification of medical documentation. Each one layered over the other, not as separate actions, but as parts of a single, escalating decision that had gone too far to undo. Daniel leaned back slightly, his composure not gone, but fractured. You think this is simple, he said. You think this is greed. Hale tilted his head just slightly. Isn't it? Daniel's eyes flickered. For the first time, uncertainty. Sophie Parker sat in a different room, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup she hadn't touched. Her appearance had changed more than anyone else's. The carefully maintained control she once carried was gone, replaced by something raw, exposed, and exhausted. Her pale skin looked even lighter under the harsh lights, her eyes swollen from hours of crying, her posture folded inward as if trying to make herself smaller. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't denying anything. She was explaining. I didn't want it to go that far, she said, her voice unsteady but honest. I thought we would fix it before it mattered. The officer across from her took notes quietly. And when it did matter, he asked. Sophie's eyes filled again, but she didn't look away. I didn't know how to stop, she said. That was the truth, and for once, it was enough. Back at the medical facility, Evelyn stepped out into the hallway, her phone already in her hand before she realized she had picked it up. She didn't hesitate this time. She called him. Alex Carter answered on the second ring. It's done, she said. A brief silence. Then, I know, Alex replied. He stood near the same window as before, the city stretched out beneath him, but the tension that had once filled his posture was gone, replaced by something quieter. Not satisfaction, not relief, just completion. They confirmed everything, Evelyn continued. The drugs, the awareness, all of it. Alex nodded slightly, though she couldn't see it. They will, he said. The structure was too tight to fall apart without leaving evidence. Evelyn hesitated, then asked the question that had been waiting. Why did you really get involved? Alex didn't answer immediately. When he did, it started with the money, he said. It always does. A pause. But it doesn't end there. Evelyn understood. Will you come here? She asked. Another pause, then, no, Alex said quietly. There was no hesitation in it, no regret. That's not how this works. Evelyn smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see that either. Thank you, she said. Alex didn't respond to that. He simply ended the call. And just like that, he was gone from the story. Not because he didn't matter, but because his role was complete. Back in the room, Margaret rested, her breathing steady, her presence no longer questioned, no longer hidden. Sophie would face what came next. Daniel would answer for what he had done, and Evelyn. Evelyn would carry something far more complicated than anger, understanding, because the truth wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how it had happened, and how easily it could have stayed hidden. But it didn't, because this time, someone listened, someone questioned, and someone refused to stay silent.
Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with noise. It waits, quietly, buried beneath fear, doubt, and silence, until someone is brave enough to question what doesn't feel right. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about awareness, about the moment a person chooses to look closer instead of looking away. Because evil rarely appears as chaos. It often hides behind calm voices, clean explanations, and things that seem normal. But one voice, one doubt, one decision to care can change everything. Evelyn didn't have power. She didn't have proof. All she had was the courage to listen, and sometimes that's enough to save a life. If this story touched you in any way, maybe it's not just a story. Maybe it's a reminder that God doesn't always send miracles as something grand or obvious. Sometimes He sends them through people, through moments of doubt, through quiet instincts, through the feeling that something isn't right. So listen to that voice. Protect the people you love and never ignore what your heart is trying to tell you. If you believe in second chances, in truth and in justice, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Ask Alex Karma Stories. And tonight, before you sleep, say a small prayer for yourself, for your family, and for anyone out there still waiting for someone to listen. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you always.